Well, Stormy and I want to welcome you back to GLBC Connections today. I want to talk about Psalm 115. As we do that, I'm reminded of something that happened to me when I was very young. I was probably a teenager. I was walking around with a dad and his young son. His son was 4 or 5 years younger than I was. And as we walked around, all of a sudden, the dad spit on the ground. We were walking around outside. And within 10 seconds, his son also spit on the ground. And neither of them even noticed that the other had done it. And then we walked along for another minute or so. And then the dad spit again. And then the son spit again. What was going on? I chuckled inwardly because I got kind of a kick out of it. Neither even noticed it was going on. The son didn't notice really that the dad had spit. I mean, I think he was just kind of unconsciously doing it. The dad certainly didn't notice what his son was doing. And what was going on there? Well, we tend to want to be like things that matter to us, people that matter to us. And so the son saw his dad and he wanted to be like him. He admired him. And so he wanted to do what he did. And so in some very unconscious ways, he was doing it. Psalm 115 actually has a similar theme, and it's a theme that's actually found quite a bit in the Old Testament, hardly ever remarked upon, though, in the church. And I think it's important that we see it because it says something really powerful and profound to us today. So let me start and give a little background before we get to that theme. We'll start with the first three verses of Psalm 115. They say this: "Not to us, O Lord, but to your name be the glory because of your love and faithfulness. Why do the nations say, 'Where is their God?' Our God is in heaven. He does whatever pleases him." Well, here's the issue that Israel faced for much of its history. In the ancient Near East, where Israel existed, typically how they viewed their gods was the strongest nations. Their gods were the most powerful. And so if you went to war and you won, basically, you were considered to have the most powerful god. This is something that Israel really fought against. And one of their important contributions to their faith was just the notion that they said that really doesn't matter. Our God, they say, he does what he pleases. And so even as Israel sat in exile, they could say, "Not to us, but to you. Our God, to you goes the glory," because they recognized his sovereignty and his power, despite the fact that they sat in exile, that their king had lost. And so, in this way, Israel contributed the idea that God was sovereign no matter what was happening to his people. And that was really unusual to the ancient Near East. So that right there for us is the first most important lesson. God's power and judgment are not based just on what happens to his people. In fact, sometimes we find that suffering is a part of what it means to be the people of God. That circumstances sometimes do go badly for Christians, but that is not an indictment of the character and judgment of God. Well, what are the options then? Well, if you didn't worship God in the ancient Near East, you worshiped an idol. And Psalm 115 has quite a bit to say about that. And that's the theme that I think is seen a lot in the Old Testament and not remarked on very much. And I want you to see these verses and really listen to them as I read them to you. It starts in verse 4. After talking about God, Yahweh, the psalmist says this: "Our God is in heaven. He does whatever pleases him. But their idols are silver and gold, made by human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear, noses but cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel, feet but cannot walk, nor can they utter a sound with their throats." And so the psalmist points to the idols that other people worshiped, the idols they thought were so powerful, and they sort of laughed at them a little bit. And they said, you had to build that. That's not a god. It's no good at all. He can't see, can't speak, can't do anything. He just sits there. It's just a lump of metal in the end. But here's the key point. It's this 8th verse that should really grab our attention. "Those who make them," that is idols, "those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them." The psalmist says all of those ideas, all those things that idols are. They can't see, they can't do anything, they can't taste or smell. If you worship idols, you become like them. That's a key point. We become like what we worship. That should be really important to us because there are all sorts of things that are vying for our worship in our particular culture. Of politics vies for our worship. And if you worship politics, if you think that's what's important, if you spend your time reading it, thinking about it, and spending all of your mental energies on it, it's an idol, and you become like these other idols. You can't really do the things that God has called you to do. He's called you to worship Him. That's true for money as well. We often in our culture get very attached to how much money we have and consider it a badge of honor. But that's an idol in its own right, and it can't do anything. It can't do anything for you, and it can't eat, it can't taste, it can't smell, and you become just like it when you worship it. Deaf, dumb, blind. It's true for status and work, and we make those things our idols so often, or even our social networks work in the same way that work previously. In the same way work has meant for us status, so often social networks mean status. When we worship those things, we become deaf and dumb just like them. The point so often in the Old Testament is simply this. Idols create work for you and give you nothing. In the end, you make them, but they're just lumps and they can't do anything for you. In fact, in some other places, there's even an indicator that idols not only do they involve work for you to make them, they're very demanding. And in the end, they're not satisfying. So that's the caution for today's psalm, to think about what we truly worship and to want to be like the thing that we worship. In the end, it's a call to worship God in Jesus Christ and keep our eyes on Jesus alone, because only when we do that can we become like Jesus. We can't become like Jesus when we worship other things, but we keep our eyes fixed on Him. And as we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, we become like Jesus, and that's what we're made to be. That's the big idea behind the first half of Psalm 115, and I hope you've really caught the gist of that theme, that we become like that which we worship, that you'll take it to heart and think about that which you do worship and the things that you tend to worship. Thanks for joining us today.